Okay, so this is part two of this presentation. If you didn't watch the part earlier that is an ed puzzle that is about states, I recommend doing that first because this part builds a bit on that. And this is going to focus on power and what it looks like for a state to have power and then how they use it and so forth. So we talked before about power, and that is the ability to exert one's will on someone else. And for states, they're pretty much categorized in these three ways. You have strong states, weak states, and then failed states. A strong state just means one that is actually able to fulfill basic tasks. So it can achieve the things that are responsibilities of a state. It can defend itself, it can make and enforce rules, collect taxes, manage the economy. On the other hand, a weak state isn't really able to do those things. It's pretty haphazard, meaning sort of random in the way it applies law and order. There are rebels in its midst and organized crime, there's corruption, there's low economic development. And of course, there's going to be a spectrum here. There's states that are somewhere along this in terms of some being much stronger, some being weaker, some in the middle. But this is kind of what you're looking for. If you're going to say a state is strong, it's like, okay, it can pretty much fulfill the functions expected of a state. A weak state cannot. And then finally, the failed state is one that's just essentially completely broken down. There's really poor institutionalization of the apparatus of government and all these sort of things. People don't recognize its legitimacy. So maybe there's a territory there, but no one respects it. No one's really confident in who's running things. So we will probably look at an example of a failed state when we're together. But in any case, that's just kind of the extreme version of a weak state where, yeah, the legitimacy has fallen apart and it's just not functional at all. Not many states fall quite into that category. They're more often going to be strong or weak. And by the way, this is going to be shorter, just going to be quickly going over a couple things here. And so, under power, we have two important concepts. One is capacity and the other autonomy. It's easy, they're not very similar words, but it's kind of easy to mix them up because they're sort of tied together in the way we think about how a state operates. And so capacity is the ability of the state to wield power to do basic tasks. So it's just able to do what it sets out to do. Autonomy, on the other hand, practical ability to act on independence. Now, be very careful with this because notice we're not talking about the people here as being like the people are very independent and have lots of rights and so on. It's sort of the opposite in a way because we're saying the state can operate in a way where it doesn't have to rely on input from lots of other actors. So if there's a state that just says, you know what, we're going to build a pipeline here or a dam or something, or we're going to, usually think about it for like big infrastructural projects, maybe, yeah, build big buildings or something. A state with high autonomy can just kind of do that. A state with low autonomy is going to have to get input from a lot of people. They're going to get criticism from the press and from the people. There may be uh, local committees set up, political action committees who are giving their voice and so on. So you can see, so then, yeah, a high autonomy state then, as it says, can act for the public without much blowback, meaning they don't really have to worry about the opinion of the people. They just can kind of do what they want to do. Low autonomy, they're at the command, or at least at having to answer to the people and groups in other states. So they're therefore sort of captured. They're beholden to or responsible to what the people think. So you can obviously see there are some advantages and disadvantages to each of those, because sometimes it is helpful for a state if there's something that really needs to do just to be able to do it. But of course, that means it has a lot more power and it can be much more abusive if it uses its power irresponsibly. So we will just, I know this is wordy, so I'll talk a bit about each of these little subcategories. So we have a chart here. Obviously, on the left side, we have high capacity and low capacity, and then up across the top, high autonomy and low autonomy. Because states can pretty much fall within any of these four groupings. They can either be high capacity and high autonomy, low capacity with high capacity, low autonomy, and then low capacity, low autonomy. Um, you can pretty much have a functional state, at least to an extent, with any of these except for the low capacity, low autonomy. And I know that's bottom right corner, but I'll start there. Just because as it says there, in this case, the state lacks the ability to fulfill basic tasks and is subject to direct public control and interference. The power is highly decentralized, so spread way out among state and non-state actors, pretty much going to be a weak state. And so the danger there is there's too low a level of capacity and autonomy and may even lead to state failure. That's obviously not a good situation. So the state can't really fulfill, it doesn't have a capacity to fulfill tasks, and it doesn't have, and it has too much input going on. So it's really ineffective. Okay, but now I'll kind of go at a diagonal up to high capacity and high autonomy, because this is probably the easiest to understand. Um, this is just the state is able to fulfill basic tasks, minimum public intervention, highly centralized, it's a strong state. I'm realizing I may go a little longer than I thought, even though it's not many slides. So, um, yeah, this basically means the state can do what it wants to do, and it's actually able to. So China is probably a good example of this. A lot of centralized authority and power. It has these big projects it's able to just do. But as we know, China is also a big persecutor of many groups like the Uyghurs, many Christians there, other groups like the Falun Gong, which is a small sect. They're, it has a very clear idea of here's who we are as a state. It can achieve important, impressive projects and things, but it also misuses that power frequently. All right, then we have high capacity, low autonomy on the top right. Here it's a state that's able to fulfill basic tasks, but the public plays a direct role in determining policy and is able to limit state power and scope of activity. So here we're thinking about something like Canada or the US. Um, there's a lot of input from the people. They all have opinions. They're generally able to express those opinions. You have local town councils that will debate things. People can come up and speak their opinion at those things. And so you have a lot of voices that go into how things are going to be done, but ultimately the state does still generally function pretty well when you compare it to other places in the world. Obviously, no one, people will complain about the failures of the state, things it doesn't do well. Not that it's a failed state, it's just that, people complain a lot about bureaucracy and red tape. It's an expression meaning when things are more difficult to do than people feel like they ought to. But nevertheless, the state does fulfill its essential functions. So it's low autonomy because it has to receive input from other voices. It can't just exclude those and just kind of operate independently. It does take all those voices in, but ultimately it is still able to fulfill basic tasks. Okay, then you have low capacity, high autonomy in the bottom left. Here, this is, okay, state able to function with a minimum of public interference or direct control, but its capacity to fulfill basic tasks is limited. The danger is the state is ineffectual, limiting development, and slow development may provoke public unrest. Now, I will say the top two tend to be, the better position for a society to be in. Down here, this is where you think of a government that has quite a bit of control, like let's say Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, but just doesn't have the resources to actually enact or execute much of what it would like to do generally. Um, so, uh, yeah, so maybe this could be kind of good in some sense in that it's sort of restrained in what it's able to do, but ultimately, yeah, generally this means it's going to have tasks out in front of it. It has the autonomy. It doesn't get interference from other people. but it unfortunately lacks capacity to fulfill basic tasks. The advantage in a high autonomy, low capacity versus low autonomy, low capacity is that at least there's more stability here. There is there are people in the government where you know who they are, you know who's running things. They may not be able to run it very well, but there's some degree of stability of things kind of being more predictable, I guess you'd say. So, yeah, but there can be, as you see, definitely problems associated with any of these. Some of them, it's tough to see how they would function at all. But even when they would function a little better, like the ones at the top, there are downsides to how they would function. So, yeah. All right, I'm going to leave it there and I'll have you respond in some ways separately, and I will note that.